Welcome, everybody, to The Journey Conversations with publisher Kris Milligan. I am A.W. Finnegan, author of The Sleeper Agent. Today, we will be talking to Wayne Madsen and Peter Grant. Wayne Madsen is an investigative journalist and syndicated columnist whose articles have appeared in publications such as In These Times, the Miami Herald, and the Village Voice. He is the author of Genocide and Covert Operations in Africa, 1993 to 1999, and the Handbook of Personal Data Protection. A former U.S. naval officer, he has appeared on 2020, 60 Minutes, and Nightline. He is also the author of several TrineDay books like Jaded Tasks and Overthrow a Fascist Regime on $15 a day. Peter Grant is a writer and independent researcher specializing in open source intelligence with a special focus on history and politics in Russia and the former Soviet Union, global kleptocracy and corruption, Eurasian organized crime, and the activities of Russia's intelligence services. In particular, he focuses on the interplay between these issues and American politics. He is also the author of While We Slept, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, and the Corruption of American Democracy. And now, your host, publisher Kris Milligan.
Thank you, Adam, very much. And thank you, Wayne and Peter for coming on. Uh, I do think that it is a time to have some discussions about what's going on in the world. And Wayne, you were in NSA, and just give me a quick little rundown of what you think's going on.
Well, I mean, what we're seeing is something I've been warning about through various writings. Now, over the past, I'd say 20, 25 years, I saw indications of it with George W. Bush's administration. And I even saw some discomforting things with the Obama administration as far as the intelligence community. But what we're seeing now is a full-fledged fascist takeover of the United States government, total abrogation of the U.S. Constitution by Trump and an unelected foreign billionaire, richest guy in the world, who came to this country on a student visa and stayed, and he's actually here. He was here illegally, but he was granted citizenship. So everything that's happening, the wholesale destruction of the federal government, the regulatory agencies, the safety agencies. Now the latest with Trump taking over the post office. I look back at what Hitler did in 1933, and it's a carbon copy of what he did. And in this case, we have a totally worthless Congress. I mean, the Democrats don't have any majority, and even with people like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, I wonder what they think is going on, because to hear the rhetoric, it's like, well, we're attempting to reach across the aisle. No, that's not what we need to be hearing now. It should be, we're going to storm across the aisle, and we're going to shove this fascism thing down the throats of these Republicans.
Yeah.
So that's what I see. I think the next thing Trump is going for is what Hitler did. He got rid of self-government in the Weimar Republic in Germany. We've already seen indications Trump wants to get rid of DC self-rule. He will try to eliminate their right to vote presidential elections, which means free electoral votes will probably be given to some Republican state. And I think what we've seen with his rhetoric with New York and California, he's going to go for the two big states, the two big Democratic states, New York and California. And I think he will do exactly what Hitler did. He's going to rule states directly, get rid of state governors, legislatures, and state judiciaries.
Well, that's a real blitzkrieg, and I'm hoping the Constitution stands. Now, Peter, you aren't a TrineDay author, but you reached out to us, and I really enjoy your book. What's your assessment of what's going on?
Well, I think Trump showed us exactly his disdain for following rules and laws in his first term, particularly towards the end of it. And he wasn't really shy. He wasn't really hiding what he was planning on doing. He said he was going to be a dictator on day one, and that's pretty much what he's done. So I would agree with Wayne. I think he's going to push things as far as he can go, violate the law insofar as he sees it as a political and business benefit to himself. And I think that so the question is what Trump is going to do is not particularly surprising. The real question is what everyone else in the US government, I mean, how they're going to respond. And we've seen certainly the Republican Congress has shown no interest whatsoever in fulfilling their traditional constitutional role of serving as a check and balance. And when you have an entire branch of government basically preemptively surrender their constitutional prerogatives, how is the system itself supposed to work? I mean, the founders of this country believed that the checks and balances were all based upon the ambitions and powers that they assumed everyone was going to be pursuing. And so for me, I'm more interested. I'm someone who's studied Trump quite closely. He's doing exactly not only what I thought he was going to do, but pretty much what he said he was going to do. And so I think the real question is anyone going to stand up? And really, for a constitutional republic to work, I mean, sure, you need an opposition party, but you really need all of the parties to come together and have some basic semblance of shared rules by which we adjudicate our disagreements. And right now, we're just completely lacking that. So it remains unclear whether or not there's anything that Trump could do that could eventually spur people in the Republican Party to say, hey, this has gone too far. We still believe in constitutional government. So my worry is that if you don't have anybody on the other side who's at least willing to stand up to the Constitution, how is it supposed to, even if you do have a functional opposition party, it's difficult for me to see how constitutional government can survive when you have a significant portion of the country that apparently seems to no longer believe in it and not be willing to stand up for it.
Yeah, you got about half the population that's scared, and the other half, or a little less than that, is just being smug. And I have to look at this at the lens of how I've been looking ever since my daddy took me into a room with a professor, and his first words, he says the Vietnam War is about drugs, and there's these secret societies behind it. And then he says, and communism's all a sham. These same secret societies are behind it all. And so there's been this march of history that these secret societies have been trying to control for many, many years. Okay. And I mean, when before the ink on the Constitution was dry, there was people that were working against it. One of them being the Mallet Prevost family, who are the forebears of the Dulles brothers. Okay. And so they've been playing this game. I watched it with the presidency. They tried really hard. I mean, it was very funny. In the 40s. Okay, the Republicans felt very much that Dewey was going to win. Okay, but he didn't, and so that ended up. We had these parallel intelligence agencies that Dulles was running, and that gave us Nixon because he blackmailed the Dulles brothers to get in power. And then he becomes part of this big narrative because when they get people up there, then, that the public, realizes they can use them as part of this narrative. I mean, Nixon you know, he's a representative in 46. He's a senator in 48, and he's the vice president in 52. Okay, now a blackmailer a lot of times thinks that, well, heck, I'm in power. I'm black, but there's an interesting relationship between a blackmailee and a blackmailer. Okay, so again, we get this Democrat, and then they get a Republican. Okay, and the Republican Nixon tries to trash the Constitution, and so uh, they get in Gerald Ford, okay, who's been very helpful to this secret societal network. And it's my understanding that he went through what I call the football training, mind control training as a kid. I mean, Gerald Ford's real name is Leslie King Jr. Okay, and so and if Squeaky Jane Fromm and Sarah Moore would have been better shots, who would have been president? Okay, Nelson Rockefeller, a completely unelected president, and they had just changed the rules so he could have been president for almost 12 years. Okay, and a lot of this in the backstory is about drugs. Okay, because the drugs create this huge big pile of money that allows these people to spread it around and do corruption. Okay, and so uh, so you had like I say, Squeaky Jane Fromm, Sarah Moore weren't Bertie shots, so Nelson didn't get to be president, and so David Rockefeller pulls up Jimmy Who, okay, and then they besmirch him and put in Reagan, okay, with George H.W. Bush as the vice president, and if Reagan doesn't realize who's in power, I mean, Reagan gets shot within 90 days. Okay, and one of the big things that Bush is doing, he's taking all these disparate drug runs that people have been stepping on each other's toes and whatnot. He gets them and starts running them through the Arkansas bond market, and you had this, and Clinton was basically a lieutenant in the Bush crime family. So we had this crime family running the United States for many years. Okay, and then the internet came along, and a lot of people say, well, the internet's DARPA. Well, yeah, the internet's DARPA, but the internet is also the American people. Okay, and the American people and the world population, okay, drove the internet into something way beyond what these guys could control, and we've been seeing since. They've been clawing back control. It's very interesting. We did the book One Nation Under Blackmail, and I was talking to Whitney while I was reading some of the stuff, and I says, "Have you ever heard of J. Orland Grab?" And she'd never heard of him. I mean, he was a big thing on the internet for a while. He was a Wharton professor. Did the first book on derivatives. And I mean, him and James Norman were dumping stuff on the internet, Casper Weinberger's Swiss bank account, and really getting into showing the corruption. Well, these guys, had to claw back. I mean, you try and find Jay Orland on the internet today, and he's very hard to find. You got to go into the Internet Archives and stuff, and look really, really, really deep. Okay, and so. They were seeing that they can't control things through regular channels. So basically, because of the drugs and different things, like I say, you have the secret societal network, then you have the sovereign countries. In between that, you have a bunch of criminal gangs, and that's what they're doing. And then you have an interesting group of people. I call them the hats, not the guys with the funny hats, but generally fedoras, that are all around Putin and all around Netanyahu, and actually all around Trump too. Okay, so the power structure is we've got these fascists who are basically trying to destroy the United States of America, and then when you look at it. If these Doge guys, okay, can go into our computer things and hack all these things, another thing that they can hack is elections. Okay, and because if you look at about 2014, Israeli military hacker unit, okay, had come in with the ability to affect air gap computers. In other words, computers that aren't hooked up to the internet. And that was in 2014. Okay, that's 11 years ago. Okay, and according to information that's out there now, basically all you have to do is get a smartphone in the vicinity of an air gap computer, and you can hack it. And why did Mr. Musk go around and pay people $100 for their information about their election information? Because that gives him the ability to take that information and then screw with computers that are doing the election. So, I see this whole thing as a completely illegal act that is directed against the American population, and it's very, very sad. So, Wayne, is that possible?
Yeah, and the other thing, I just think the clock in this timeline. Now we could argue, how did we get to this timeline? But it seems to be speeding up, because within the last couple of days, the U.S. has basically shown its backhand to NATO. NATO was the strongest it had ever been since its creation in 1949, when Biden left office, and now basically the United States has changed its foreign policy. We are now allied with Russia against Ukraine, against all of NATO, and for example, the G7 leaders that annually around this time of the year, it's the anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The G7 leaders put out a statement condemning Russia's war against Ukraine. Well, the United States refused to sign that. So effectively, the G6, it's the G6 now, minus the United States. It used to be the G8 when Russia was in. Now it's the G6 with us and Russia effectively out of it. The U.S. this year did not support the UN General Assembly resolution voted by an overwhelming number of members of the United Nations condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We will probably abstain on it with Belarus, North Korea, Russia, and a few other dictatorships. And with NATO right now is scrambling. It looks like maybe one of the things, the good things come out of this. I think Britain will try to gain readmittance to the European Union through some sort of backdoor, not the formal accession process, because Prime Minister Starmer of the Labour government is now basically standing up with President Macron in France and saying, look, we're ready to commit military forces to protect Ukraine. Now, why is that important? Okay, maybe Ukraine lost and NATO lost its nuclear security umbrella that we gave it, but France and Great Britain are nuclear powers also. The only thing that could affect this is Sunday's German general election, where the AfD, which is the neo-Nazi party, recently getting an endorsement from Elon Musk and Vice President Vance. If they could come in second, they're not going to have enough seats to form a government. But if they come in second, like the Nazis did with the Weimar Republic, they could prove very, very disruptive as far as Germany's support for Ukraine, the Baltics, Poland, and other European countries that Putin has his eye on.
Right. So, Peter, now you wrote While We Sleep, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, and the Corruption of American Democracy. I mean, it's quite obvious to anybody with eyes that Putin has something on Trump. What's your thoughts on that?
Um, I'm very open to the possibility that he has something on Trump, although I would say that it's not actually necessary. Let me try to explain. So, most people, I encourage people. So, Donald Trump's first book, and it's very famous, is The Art of the Deal. Everyone has heard of The Art of the Deal, but very few people have heard of, much less read, his second book. And his second book was called Surviving at the Top. And the reason why no one ever heard of it was because it was released in 1992. And basically, it was released right when his string of bankruptcies first occurred. And everyone essentially thought that Trump was yesterday's news. He was a flash in the pan of the 1980s. And the interesting thing about this book is that I encourage you to go to the very last chapter. And he basically writes a chapter about what he would do as president of the United States. And it is exactly what he is doing. He is basically saying that he is going to do 25% tariffs across the board against all of our allies. And he developed this, or at least he first started publicizing this idea in the late 1980s. So in July of 1987, Donald Trump visited Moscow for the very first time. And before that, he was making these I mean, he had randomly met Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev had came over to the United States during the period of perestroika and glasnost, and Trump met him in a brief social setting. Trump's uncle was a professor at MIT, and Trump always brings him up as basically, oh, well, the Trump family is super smart because my uncle was super smart. And Trump would say things like, and this is going to sound familiar to all of us, I can solve the Cold War in 1 hour. I can do disarmament in 1 hour, one meeting. And so he essentially was a narcissistic megalomaniac who I think the at the Soviets at that time sized up very easily. And basically is like, all we need to do is basically massage this guy's ego, and that's essentially it. We don't even necessarily need to implant ideas in his own head, because he's absolutely convinced that he can solve all these problems and everyone else is just stupid losers. And so Trump traveled to Moscow in July of 1986. It was a trip organized by Gossen Tourist, which was the KGB-led tourism agency in Russia. And then in September, 2 months later, through Roger Stone, Donald Trump purchased 3 full-size page ads, and I believe it was the New York Times, USA Today, and perhaps the Washington Post, where basically he laid out then the basic foreign policy plan that he's had ever since, which is basically all of that Japan and Europe are basically taking our money and treating us as suckers, and we need to penalize them with tariffs, and if we do that, then we'll be strong. And so basically, Russia has used this, this is the line of thinking that benefits Russia. And so all they've needed to do is feed into his ego. Now, so that can also be true. There's also been decades worth of contacts between Trump and individuals linked to, I say Eurasian organized crime, because yes, some were Russian, but others were Ukrainian, others were Belarusian, Kazakh, from all the various Central Asian countries. Trump had deals that he was trying to do in Astana, Kazakhstan. He was trying to do deals in the former Soviet country of Georgia. And basically, he had individuals with very close linkages to Eurasian organized crime, were funding Trump Tower Toronto, Trump Tower Soho. So Donald Trump has for years, I mean, really decades, had close personal interactions with individuals who are linked to KGB money laundering operations and things of that nature. So I'm basically kind of making two arguments here. One, they very well could have something on Trump. I mean, he traveled to, a lot of people focus on the 2014 trip where he infamously stayed at the Ritz-Carlton, and that was the type of stuff that the very controversial Steele dossier was writing about. But there were other trips. And to me, I think the much more interesting trip he took to Moscow was in 1996. He traveled to Moscow with two of his friends, a gentleman by the name of Howard Lorber and another Bennett LeBeau. Basically, and they were looking, and he was partying with Leon Black, who, as we know later, was providing money to Jeffrey Epstein. So Trump has a long history of visiting the former of Moscow. So is there some potential compromise, on him that the Russians possess? It's certainly possible, but I would even go further than that and say it's actually not even necessary, because really what Trump is from the very beginning has voiced a kind of self-obsessed personal view of how global politics works that the Russians were able to suss out very quickly as being, hey, this is going to help us if we promote this guy and his crazy theories. So yeah, that's basically, or I think where we're at the moment. And just to add one more thing. So what's going to, the Russians do not want the upcoming, quote, negotiations to simply be about Ukraine. They want these negotiations to be seen as this kind of world-altering key moment in the history of global relations. And they're going to use that to play on Trump's inherent egotism. So they're going to say, I'll tell you what, Donald, we're going to change everything, and don't listen to anyone because they're all idiots and they think they're smarter than you, as they've said for years and years and years. And they're going to appeal to his egotism to try to make this giant world-altering agreement a Yalta for the 21st century. And I bet they'll, and it's my view is that they'll play him like a fiddle, and that even his closest aides in the administration are gonna have no idea. Just like they had no idea that Trump was going to suddenly declare that we were going to own Gaza. That was just something that Trump occurred to him, and he just said, okay, this is what we're doing now. And everyone just kind of nodded along and basically said, okay, well, that's what we're doing. So Trump, who is a complete megalomaniacal egomaniac, who believes that he's this kind of chosen, literally, he's said he's been chosen by God to save the United States, and that's why he was spared from his various assassination attempts. He's going to walk into these negotiations where the Russians are, I believe, going to play him extraordinarily well. Whether or not they have any compromise on him, at this point, I'm not even so sure that it matters.
Right. Well, I can understand that. I mean, basically, blackmail, sex and money are the big things that you can be blackmailed about. And, a lot of it comes from, I mean, the basic body language that you see with Trump and Putin. I mean, he doesn't act like somebody who's just on the same page, or they're pushing him on the same page. He acts like somebody that's got a leash around him. That's just my personal opinion. Wayne, do you have any comments about what Peter talked about?
Oh yeah, I absolutely. I agree that Trump has been in the Soviet and Russian orbit for a number of years, and I believe that Trump first became a target for as a Russian asset back in '78 when he married Ivana Zelnikova. This was his first wife, the one that eventually fell down the steps in her Manhattan condominium.
Buried her on the golf course.
And buried in the back 40 at the Bedminster golf course. Yeah, grown up in weeds. So, but Ivana Zelnikova was the daughter of Milos Zelnikov, who was not only a Communist Party official in the Czech uh, town of Zlín, which it was so communist. It's known as Zlín now, but under the communist government, it was called Gottwaldov, named after the Czechoslovak communist leader Clement Gottwald. So Trump's father-in-law, which he was not only a communist functionary, but he was an intelligence asset for the Czechoslovak STB, which was the Allied intelligence service for the KGB. All the Warsaw Pact nations shared intelligence, and the Czechoslovaks certainly shared all of their assets and intelligence gained from those assets with the KGB. So I believe that, back in the day when Roger Stone and Roy Cohn and Donald Trump were cavorting around Manhattan in places like Studio
54.
54 and some other questionable places of ill repute, that this was all known to the Czechoslovaks, which they were given the task by the Russians to gather as much intelligence on the sexual appetites and habits of key U.S. businessmen, politicians, and other celebrities. And these operations took place in New York. They took place in Washington. It was such a success that the Czechoslovak KGB had a couple, a man and his wife, in New York and Washington, who managed to ingratiate themselves and insert themselves in a swingers club in Fairfax County, Virginia, and in downtown Washington that included a number of CIA agents. Right now, this is at the very same time that Roger Stone, Donald Trump, and Roy Cohn were, engaged in all kinds of questionable activities, all while Donald Trump is married to the daughter of this Czechoslovak intelligence asset, Zelnikova. It's one degree of separation here, I just wonder how much of the FBI files on this episode are going to be destroyed by Kash Patel. I mean, this guy is out to do everything he can, like Lavrentiy Beria, the infamous Soviet KGB head. He's going to run a scorched earth campaign to destroy all of Trump's enemies and all the information that can indict Trump. I would also note that Donald Trump Jr. Was basically taken. He visited the Czech Republic several times and considered Milos Zelnikov, his grandfather, as a mentor. Now he's died since, but we look at Donald Trump Jr. and this. He just doesn't seem to be as the loyal type of American, since he's always castigating American generals and other political leaders. But I think when you're basically, you've been mentored by a communist party intelligence functionary, you get Donald Trump Jr.
Right. So Adam, listening to these guys, what's your thoughts about all of this?
Well, it's very interesting because this isn't really my area, and but I've definitely over the years been paying attention to some of the things that John Loftus has been saying, and he's written articles. I remember John Loftus had written that article about the origins of that whole QAnon thing and how they got all those Trump people all riled up and um but yeah, I mean, it was concerning when I saw the other day when I saw him say uh if it's not illegal or it's not illegal if it saves the country or something. What was
Right.
it?
A Napoleon quote. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Right.
some of the things that Wayne's talking about, those are some serious connections. Now, I've looked into a lot of these areas in the realm of biological warfare between, the KGB element of that. So I saw a lot of concerning things in that realm. So I can only imagine that in the political realm would be just as bad, if not worse.
Right. So, Peter, do you have any process looking into the future? What do you think is going to happen here?
Um, Unfortunately, I don't have a particularly rosy view of the next couple of years. It's very unclear to see. I mean, like as I was mentioning, I think we're already beginning to see basically the wholesale betrayal of Ukraine, and Article 5 in for NATO. I mean, even if we're still technically in, who is going to believe that Donald Trump is going to protect, say, the Baltic states? I mean, I wouldn't be too confident if I were them. So it kind of functionally is kind of dead in a way. So I think probably what's going to happen is we're going to see um, some kind of summit between Putin and Trump. I know that there's supposed to be one coming up in Saudi Arabia, and then there were some discussions potentially of Putin coming to the United States and Trump visiting Moscow even. And in May there's their Victory Day parade. And so, in the wildest outcome, I think you could even see Trump standing next to Putin with the Kremlin as the backdrop, and Russian tanks and soldiers marching by. But honestly, I think that the Russians are going to play Trump's megalomania, and they're going to basically get him to believe that it is his great historic role to create this rapprochement between Russia and the United States, and that the things that he had been arguing for as far back as the early 90s, for raising tariffs and having a global trade war, that's probably going to go forward as well. So I think in the next 2 to 4 years, what we're going to see is a further decline in transatlantic relations, a weakening of the United States relationship with its traditional European allies. It's unclear to me how the Ukrainians are going to respond to being sold out by Donald Trump. I mean, people were counting out Ukraine in the first days of the war, and yet they've managed to survive. So who knows? Maybe they'll be able to hold off the Russians longer. Unfortunately, without significant support by the United States and without Europe stepping up in a major way in which they haven't really done for decades, it's hard for me to see how the Ukrainians are going to be able to sustain themselves in the long run. So I have a fairly dark view of the next 2 to 4 years. I think we're going to see a deepening of relations between the United States and Russia. I think that the cognitive dissonance that the Republicans in Congress is just not only going to continue but deepen, and the Europeans are going to have to learn how to deal with their own neighborhood on their own without the help of the United States. And even if we do get someone after Donald Trump who is not a Trumpist, it's difficult for me to see how the rest of the world is going to be able to rely on the United States as a long-term partner. when they have absolutely no idea whether we're going to flip over again in another 4 years. So, and that's only the international situation, which is extremely serious. But to Wayne's point at the beginning of our discussion, we've got very serious domestic issues here in the United States. And our main responsibility is going to be the preservation of our Constitution and our Republic. And if we can't do that, we can't really have a cohesive foreign policy. So I think probably we're going to be, most of us, at least those of us who consider ourselves proponents of the Constitution and of the traditional American Republic, we're going to have our work cut out for us in the next couple of years.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. Well, one thing NATO has changed. I mean, Sweden is in there and Finland is in there, and they know how to quote unquote fight too. I mean, it's really sad. And it's interesting the noise that Turkey's been making too. So I think it's going to be, I don't think the whole world's just going to roll over and say, hey, Trump, pet my belly. So I think it's going to be interesting here. And you're absolutely correct about the domestic situation here. Wayne, what do you see for the future? What's your thoughts?
Well, internationally, what I see is, unfortunately, with Trump beating his chest about how well he gets along with Putin, Xi in China, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, and other dictators, I think we're going to see the nuclear weapons club probably double in size. I think whether or not the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats are able to hold the center in Germany, or the AfD gets in. I think either way, Germany will become a nuclear-powered country. They see it without the U.S. umbrella. They're basically on their own. I think they want to be like the French and the British in that respect. I see Poland also acquiring nuclear weapons, along with Turkey. And in Asia, I see South Korea obtaining nuclear weapons because North Korea has nuclear weapons. I believe Taiwan already has them as a result of the secret nuclear weapons development program between apartheid South Africa, which, by the way, it was Peter Thiel's father, who was a uranium mining engineer, that helped apartheid South Africa get that bomb that they tested in 1979 in the South Atlantic. But that was a joint Israeli-South African operation with Taiwan. So Taiwan obviously got something out of that. And Japan, which I understand has a quick shelf to warhead a time frame, and it gets shorter and shorter every year. I believe it's 18 hours now between the time Japan can create a warhead and put it on a warhead, create a nuclear weapon, I should say, and put it on a deliverable warhead. So I think we're going to see the nuclear club. And then we had Trump recently say that Australia should become a nuclear weapons power as well. I don't know if they want to. I watched On the Beach, the movie where the world is destroyed by a nuclear war. The last surviving country is Australia. But and domestically, I think we're going to see a lot. We have to see a lot more pushback by the governors. I recently put together what I call Project 2025 Reset. How do we get back to where we were? And it's the governors taking a lot more of their sovereign rights as far as controlling their National Guard. And if Trump decides to invade Canada, hopefully the 28 or so Democratic governors will be able to use their National Guard to stop that venture.
Oh, Lord, have mercy. Well, Peter, how do people find you on the internet? And can you talk about your books just a little bit here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book, While We Slept, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, and the Corruption of American Democracy is available on Amazon. I also write articles on Medium. So if you look up Peter Grant, While We Slept, Medium, you'll find multiple articles on there. And the book really kind of it really is more narrowly about the 2016 election, what actually happened there, and the historical backdrop that led up to it. And I use the narrative device in the beginning of the book of putting Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin's lives side by side and showing basically how these two individuals who seem so very different and came up with and such different backgrounds, how history somehow brought them together in 2016. And one of the real threads that kind of links both of them throughout is Eurasian organized crime. And basically, I point out that really in the mid 1970s, the United States changed its trade policy through the Jackson-Vanik Agreement in 1974 to allow for Jewish individuals from the former Soviet Union to leave the country if they would like. And a small subset of that population were members of organized crime networks from the former Soviet Union, and many of them had links with the KGB, and they created the community of Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, which was the Russian and Ukrainian community in New York. And this occurred right at the time that Donald Trump was doing his rise. And a lot of the Russian organized crime networks interlinked with the traditional Italian five families, in particular the Colombo and the Genovese family. And so the book kind of goes through and shows Donald Trump's and his father's historical connections to organized crime in New York, later how that interfaced with organized crime emerging from the former Soviet Union. And then at the same time, I'm discussing how Vladimir Putin began as his adult life was shaped by the institution to which he dedicated his life, the KGB. And by the time the Soviet Union fell and he became the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, he began very close personal and business relationships with the most powerful organized crime group out of St. Petersburg, the Tambovskaya Bratva. And later he became involved, as the KGB did in general, in moving money out of the former Soviet Union into the West, into the Western financial markets, into the property markets, primarily of London and New York. And basically, I show how all these threads kind of come together. And then I do a very meticulous examination of really what were the nature of the contacts between Russia, individuals connected to Russia, and the Trump campaign. And the book has over 2,400 footnotes and citations. And I don't just use reporting, but court documents, FBI 302 interviews. I take a fine-tooth comb through the Mueller investigation and its report and the Senate intelligence report, and I basically put that into a long but digestible narrative as to show people, okay, this is exactly what happened, because there's been so much rancor and misinformation and debate about that what I wanted to do is go, this is a clear chronological narrative of who did what during the 2016 election. And I go over Donald Trump's multiple Trump Tower negotiations that were taking place when he announced his candidacy, and all the individuals that were involved both on the Russian side and the American side, which were many individuals with very high level links to Eurasian organized crime and the KGB money laundering operations. I discuss in detail how the very first known American to have learned about the fact that the Russians had stolen the internal communications of the DNC and the Clinton campaign was a member of the Trump campaign, George Papadopoulos, who then, after the election, when he was asked by the FBI, "Did you know about this?" he lied. And then when they followed up and said, "Look, George, we know that you knew about this. Did you tell anyone on the Trump campaign?" He did not say no. He said, "I can't remember." And then I discuss in depth the Trump campaign chairman's Paul Manafort's historical connections to Ukraine and his corrupt lobbying activities and money laundering activities, and also his meeting with Konstantin Kilimnik, who the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee outright called a Russian intelligence agent. I go in depth about Roger Stone's various communications during the election. He was in contact with the Twitter cutout that the GRU had created, Guccifer 2.0. They were exchanging Twitter direct messages. And then, of course, and then the list goes on and on. The June 9th Trump Tower meeting and the whole background to that. The activities of Michael Flynn and the fact that he was sponsoring efforts by individuals to get in touch with Russian hackers. And then finally, beyond simply Russia, I have several chapters dedicated to exploring the role that the quote Israeli private intelligence companies had, which were largely, in my view, essentially just an extension of Israeli intelligence in general. Their role in promoting and helping the Trump campaign, and they're also as the role of the Gulf states, in particular the United Arab Emirates and Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. It's no accident that these negotiations will be taking place in Saudi Arabia, and that you really can go back even to the 2016 election to see all the connections that Trump had between him and various individuals connected to Putin, the far right in Israel, and the Gulf states, which were kind of a constellation of interests that came together that basically said that they believed that a Donald Trump presidency would benefit them all. And then I guess the last curveball that I'll throw in here is that one of the things that I think is very important for people to understand about 2016 and the motivation, what was motivating all the major parties involved, was that no one actually thought that Trump was going to win. Donald Trump was essentially trying to promote his business interests and did not believe that he was going to win. The Obama administration did not believe that he had a chance of winning, which is when you look back at their activities, that's why they weren't taking a lot of the Russian activities as perhaps as seriously as they thought they should. The Hillary Clinton campaign were convinced that they were going to win, and the Russians, they really weren't supporting Donald Trump because they love and like Donald Trump. They thought by supporting his candidacy, they were going to harm the United States and embarrass the United States. And so that's why they did it. And then when all of a sudden he won, that completely scrambled everything and put us on the path to essentially where we are today, which I mean, if you had mentioned to people before he was elected in 2016, that we would be in a position where Donald Trump is about to have a personal meeting with Vladimir Putin, where he's going to reverse literally 75 years of American foreign policy, people would have thought you were crazy. And I'm sure Trump and Putin probably would have thought that was unlikely at that time as well. So anyways, that's essentially what the book is about. It's long, but it's detailed. I don't mean for anyone to rely on my authority. That's why I use so many different, for every single major claim in the book, I have a citation. I show you where I learned it. You can go follow up yourself and read about it. And Yeah, so that's essentially was the story of While We
I,
Slept.
I recommend his book, and I recommend his Medium writings. And you know, I mean, I post a lot on Facebook, different things. I got these people, and they say, "Oh, Russia, Russia, Russia," claiming it was all a big hoax. Nothing happened there. And then, it's my contention that these wars were started to besmirch Biden and to get Trump back in office, both the one in Ukraine, and then that wasn't working enough. So then they started the war in Gaza, and because also it aligns with their geopolitical goals. Wayne, how do people connect with you? And Wayne has a most recent book. It's what the story of Isa, Saint
Well,
Isa,
it's
the
a
secret of Saint
secret of
Isa.
Saint.
And how do people find your writings?
Oh, yes. I still have my website. It's WayneMatsenReport.com. And I just gave it a new look after 20 years, basically increasing the security somewhat for these times. And the books can be ordered through their Amazon. But The Secret of Saint Isa is a novel that I started contemplating in 2008 when I was visiting Nepal and Sikkim and Darjeeling in the Himalayan area of India. And I kept hearing stories about a monk who became a lama and then was sent back to his home in what's now Israel, Palestine, to bring peace to the land. And they referred to him as Saint Isa because of the the Catholic Church primarily over the years. All this history has been totally destroyed because Saint Isa happens to be Jesus Christ. And I wrote the book too. I recently completed it because with all these Christian nationalists trying to turn Jesus into a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, AR-15 wielding MAGA type, they need to have a little bit of a comeuppance. Um, they need to be called the Jesus, the real one, not their fake one. So that's why I decided to, after many years, complete this novel that I started way back when.
Well, golly, guys, thank you very much for this conversation. I learned something during this conversation. I hope the listeners did. And I really, really appreciate your time, Wayne and Peter and Adam, and onwards to a better
Onward.
future for our children.